Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Rodas, and this is my presentation for Econ 366, Economic Development. My presentation is going to be on the economic stability and development of Guatemala. Let me share my screen. Okay. Um, so first off, Guatemala is located in Central America, south of Mexico. It borders Honduras, El Salvador, and Belize. When discussing Guatemala, there's three major periods that help better explain the present. I'm going to briefly go over them. They're the Mayan, Spanish colonization, and the modern republic. The first major period is the Mayans. They're the oldest advanced civilization in the Americas. They had a long run from 700 BC to about 1200 AD. They created the mathematical concept of zero independently. They have their own written language of hieroglyphs. Um, the indigenous people of Guatemala are actually still called Mayans. It's unclear why the Mayan society ended, but the Mayan Empire had disintegrated into a number of separate tribal groups by the time the Spanish colonization happened in the 1500. Spain plundered lots of resources from Central America. They also spread Christianity. Spain ruled Guatemala and Central America for about 300 years. The modern republic is from 1840 to present. It is the third major period. The early Guatemalan government made many concessions to foreign companies. The government passed laws that ended communal land holdings of the indigenous people and allowed companies to purchase it. One of the biggest beneficiaries of these law changes was the United Fruit Company. United Fruit was a large U.S. corporation that owned 42% of all the land in Guatemala, along with the railroads and the telephone lines. They held a monopoly on bananas in Central America, and they were exempt from paying taxes in Guatemala. The United Fruit has a deep, long-lasting impact on the economic development of Guatemala. During this time, around the 1930s and 40s, 77% of the exports went to the United States and 65% of the imports came from the United States. Only 30% of Guatemalans are literate and 80% are living in poverty. 2% of the population controlled 72% of the tillable land. There was a Guatemalan political revolution called 10 Years of Spring. The Constitution was rewritten to be similar to the United States. And there was also Decree 900, which redistributed unused land greater than 224 acres to the poor and indigenous. Having sought the advice from economists across Latin America, the focus of the law was on transferring uncultivated land from large landowners to poor laborers, who would then be able to begin vying for themselves. So both the Secretary of State and the CIA director had close ties to United Fruit. They were able to convince the president that Decree 900 and the land redistribution was actually communism. So with the president's approval, they organized a coup to overthrow the new Guatemalan political revolution. The CIA saturated Guatemala with propaganda over the radio and through leaflets. They did bombings in strategic spots with unmarked planes. The Guatemalan president was forced to resign, and a new pro-business leadership was installed by the CIA. This caused a civil war that lasted for 30 years, and it ended in 1996. The Civil War was a major obstacle for foreign investment during this time. So now we go 1996 to present. And since the Civil War has ended, the economy has become relatively stable. From the graph, you can see that around 1960 to the mid-1990s, it's relatively low. And then after 1996, it starts to really shoot up. Since 1996, Guatemala has become the largest economy in Central America. And they have a GDP of nearly 77 billion and a GDP per capita of 4,600. The GDP growth rate since 2010 has averaged about 3.5%. The major exports include bananas, sugar, coffee. Coffee used to be the main export, but it's been declining because of a deadly fungus that's affected 70% of the farmers. Um, Guatemala's main export partners are the United States, El Salvador, and Honduras. Some indicators. Guatemala has an HDI score of 0.663, which puts it in the yellow. It's actually right in the middle. The life expectancy is 74, and expected years of schooling is almost 11. Despite Guatemala's stable growth rates, they have not been enough to decrease high levels of economic inequality and poverty in the country. Instead, Guatemala has been going backwards in some instances. It ranks 127th out of 189 on the Human Development Index. Poverty did reach a low of 51% in 2006. However, it has climbed back up to 59% since 2019. Literacy has increased for 89% of the non-Indigenous. However, 79% of the Indigenous people are living in poverty. The Indigenous Mayan, they reside in rural areas, and they make up 44%, and the rural areas make up 44% of the country. Almost 8 out of 10 people live in poverty when they're in those rural areas. Mining is thought to be a good source of revenue, but many of the proposed sites are considered sacred to the Indigenous. Non-Indigenous children average twice as many years of schooling compared to the Indigenous children. So you can see why they're kind of getting left behind a bit. Some of the factors impeding the tax to GDP, some of the factors impeding economic growth include the tax to GDP ratio. For comparison, the US is about 24.3%, Latin America and the Caribbean averages 23.1%, and Guatemala is very low at 12.1%. There's just been a long historical resistance of businesses paying taxes in Guatemala. More factors impeding economic development are corruption and weak institutions. When tax laws are changed, they are rarely enforced. Business dealings with the courts face high corruption risk. Bribes are often exchanged for favorable decisions, and the courts suffer from political interference. The government has not improved the quality of education, and that has led to a low-skilled workforce. Another factor impeding growth is property rights and land use. Conflicts with the Indigenous over land use have been contentious and often violent. The government sees the mines as a good source of revenue, and the Indigenous oppose because it violates their ancestral land rights and damages their livelihood. And that's been my presentation. Thank you very much. And I will be doing questions now.